library of about 850 books right now, and it's ever growing. And I particularly enjoy reading biographies and other things about historic figures or history. So I'm going to walk you through my background and where I started and how I arrived in my current position at Oracle. So I first started out in B2B software as a marketing intern with a company called Domo. They're a Tableau competitor. They were a venture-funded firm worth about $2 billion at the time. And I was doing a little bit of everything for Domo, including writing, copy, coming up with online display advertisements, controlling parts of the website via WordPress, and a lot of everything in between. And it was at Domo I really first got exposed to B2B demand generation, and I got exposed to how a B2B technology organization functions. From Domo, I went to Adobe in my first full-time role during my last semester of college. I started out as an operations manager or specialist at Adobe, and then transitioned into a program manager. And I managed all the different marketing programs for the Adobe Marketing Cloud, which is now Adobe Experience Cloud. That gave me a lot of great exposure into how products drive interest from prospects, how a pipeline works, how to manage quota, things of that nature. And it also got me more exposure to a B2B software environment. From Adobe, I went to Sabre in my first role as a product manager, and I was owning a group of data analytics products used by travel agencies to better manage their revenue. Sabre is one of 3 global reservation systems. They sell and direct mostly with airlines, hoteliers, and different travel agencies. So my portfolio was specifically designed to help travel agencies make better decisions with the data that was available in the Sabre system. It was a really great learning opportunity and got me up to speed on all things in product management and the skill sets that are associated with that. And this recent April, I transitioned to a new role with Oracle within their Marketing Cloud products. So I'm a principal product manager, and I own a specific set of functionality that I'll talk about in a second. But the journey to product management, my whole career has been in B2B SaaS software, and it's either dealt with something related to marketing, data visualization, or it's either been marketing or data visualization. So what do? I work with a product called Oracle Eloqua. Eloqua is a B2B orchestration engine, and it's one of the pillars of the Oracle Marketing Cloud portfolio. Eloqua powers powerful customer experiences for the world's leading B2B brands. And the specific part of the product that I own all things content creation within Eloqua. So if a marketer is creating an email, creating a landing page, or deciding how to send an email, and I also own things such as personalization engine and the email send engine. So we're expanding beyond just the email web experiences. There's a lot into the product that allows marketers to own the end-to-end customer experience. So we're going to dive right into the 5 skills of modern product managers. The first of the 5 is what I call design fluency. And this is about you as a product manager being able to recognize a good experience and a good design when you see it. And more importantly, being able to articulate why something is a good experience or why specifically something is not a good experience and the principles behind that. I'll note that we as product managers are not designers ourselves, but it's important that we can speak the language of design and have fluency in what makes up a good experience. So a quote here to get us kind of in the right frame of mind: design is so simple, that's why it is so complicated. So this is a quote by Paul Rand, who's one of the most famous graphic designers. He did the IBM logo, the ABC logo. He did the logo for Next Computers, which was Steve Jobs' startup after he was forced out of Apple. So really famous designer. And that's the essence of design, is it's complicated because it's hard to do things simply and to do things minimally. So let's think about some of the principles that make up good design. And these are things that can be internalized for product managers as they interface with UX designers and as they try to build the best products possible. So the first is clarity. Clarity is about the user knowing what's happening within the application without there being ambiguity or without there being friction in the experience. And clarity also makes things self-evident so that the user can guide themselves through the application without complex guidance or complex tooltips. So these two shots here of an application that you might recognize, even if you're not familiar with it, you could probably guess what type of an app this is. And it's a stock purchasing and management app called Robinhood, which is known for really good design. And you can tell that by just the patterns that are available and the graphic, the way the numbers are displayed, and the fact that you have the little stock tickers there in both of the screenshots. And that's the principle of clarity that you're able to take advantage of. The second point is consistency. Consistency is treating like elements within an application the same, whether from a visual perspective or when you click and interact with that element in the application. It should be consistent all the way through, no matter what, within your tool. And if you have a suite of capabilities, you also want that consistency across the different products there. And you can see that consistency here in the Robinhood example that I'm showing. On the top toolbar, you have the same level of navigation. I have a similar treatment of colors and elements throughout. The typography is consistent. The spacing of elements is consistent for like sections. And that adds to a user's ability to learn your product or your service much more quickly and gives them a better experience. The third principle of good design is visual hierarchy. You want the most important elements to be obvious and to be the first place the user interacts with, and you want other secondary or tertiary elements to be put to the side at a lower level. So here in the Robinhood example, I have obvious visual hierarchy. I have the balance of the account, which is the large number there. I have the trend of the value of the account based on the increments of time. And then to the second screenshot there, I have obvious hierarchy because I can see the up or down percentage of each of my stocks very clearly, and that's where my eye is drawn. And then I'm drawn to which stock that is once I decide, wow, that's a really good number or that's a really bad number. I want to look at that some more. Fourth is appropriate contrast, and I see that really well in that second screenshot. I see clear contrast between my stocks that are performing well and the stocks that are performing poorly. And that contrast is appropriate in applications so that the user gets those visual cues on how to interact with things and where to go. The fifth principle of good design is simplicity. And this is arguably one of the more difficult principles to adopt as product managers. Less is always more. If we can let users do more with less, we should always skew towards that, because that makes the product easier to learn, easier to master, and it forces us to present things in a very clear and concise way. Whereas if we don't let things be simple, we get very convoluted, cumbersome experiences that are not kind to the user. So an additional principle of design beyond those core principles I just outlined, as product managers, we need to have user empathy. We need to see ourselves in the minds or the shoes of users so that we can present things in a way that'll be beneficial to them. So here are signposts talking about the parking rules for a specific curb. And this is in Los Angeles, California. And we would consider this a hostile user experience. So if I asked you where you're allowed to park at midnight on a Saturday, it would maybe take you a minute to go through the signage and decide if you were allowed to park there or not. Because of the way it's presented, it's not a good design experience. Now, if I presented it to you like this, it's a very different story. And within 5 or 10 seconds, you're able to derive where you're allowed to park and when you're allowed to park. And you'll notice that there's 3 different user states. There's the point of time where it's free to park there. There's the point in time where you're denied parking. And there's the point in time where it's a paid parking it's allowed if you're paying. But within seconds, in the second experience, you're able to get to the point. In the first one, not so much at all. It's a very frustrating user experience. So how design fits in the development lifecycle is important. So you can internalize the principles of good design as a product manager, and you can try to have user empathy, but then there's the question of how do we incorporate design into a good agile process? I really like this schematic here by Gartner. It's a Gartner concept, and it ties together three main areas of thinking when it comes to product development. And those areas are design thinking, the lean startup, and agile development. So in design thinking, it's all about empathizing with the user and defining and creating mock-ups of what the experience is going to be. And that's what I see here on the far left quadrant, that ramping up and going into the point where I'm able to start developing and building things. After I define what the UX experience is going to be, I then go into a typical, what we call lean startup process. And that's all about shipping as soon as possible, learning from what you shipped, measuring, and then building all over again. And so the second circle here is the macro lean startup process, where I'm iterating and shipping things with customers, getting feedback, and then making a decision. Am I going to keep iterating, or do I have to start from scratch? Now, this gray circle to the far right fits into this second circle where it says iterate. And that's what we think of as the typical Scrum process. I have my sprint planning, I decide what I'm going to build, I deliver it in tiny increments, and then there's some sort of a review process. That starts over. In the overall lean startup model, the important decision is, do I pivot or persevere? And there's a book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup that talks about this in detail. As we're delivering functionality to the market, if we are getting a bad response, we have to decide, do I persevere and just keep tweaking it, or do I have to fundamentally revisit what I'm delivering for this feature or for this functionality? And that'll vary based on if you're in a startup or if you're in a full-fledged corporate environment. So some design resources to consider that I drew upon for this section. There's a really great publication called UX Collective that has good articles about this category. The same with HH Design. Google has a whole website called design.google dedicated to design principles and design resources. And then there's a website called me.com that is all about articles related to design, and designers post really good content related to these topics if you want to go learn more. And all the references that I drew upon for the presentation will be included in the PDF that's circulated after this. So the second of our 5 skills for modern product managers is what I call technical competency. And this is all about you feeling comfortable enough to interact with development teams and having the confidence to drive through innovation. The litmus test here for technical competency is, do you have the credibility with your development teams? If you don't, then you probably don't have the level of technical competency needed for a product manager to be successful. So here's a quote by an author called Jeff Patton that I really like. At the end of the day, your job isn't to get the requirements right, your job is to change the world. And technical competency fits into that. It's one thing to be a non-technical product manager and to write requirements and user stories. But in order to really change the world and drive true innovation in product, you have to have an appreciation for the technical elements that make that up. Now, the question that always comes up is, do I need to know how to code? And the answer to that is maybe. And the maybe applies to what company you work for, what product you are the product manager of, and the type of innovation you are driving. So me, myself, I am not a technical product manager, but I have a level of what I would call technical competency and domain expertise for my area. So if you're deciding, should I be technical, should I learn new frameworks, should I be really diving into code, it depends on where you're going to be working and what product you are dealing with. For the most part, though, there's plenty of product managers that do not know how to code, but they are what we consider technically competent. So what does it mean to be technically competent? here are some areas that I would want you to know about and to be able to speak to be considered technically competent. The first is being able to size up projects or new initiatives. When you're thinking about a new feature or a new set of delivery, you need to be able to say, okay, is this type of work going to be easy? Is it going to be difficult? Or is it kind of impossible based on our existing product? Now note that this isn't t-shirt sizing or story pointing. That all belongs to your Scrum teams. But you should be able to, as a product manager, think to yourself, okay, am I asking the team to do something that's relatively simple? Have we done similar things before? Is it something that's going to be more complex and needs exploration? And is it something that's probably not feasible in the current resource or time constraints that we have for our product? And it's important to know that so you don't waste your team's time and so that you have a viable roadmap that maximizes value you're delivering to your end users. Second is having a high level knowledge of how the architecture for your product works. What is the UI layer and how does that connect with the middleware and how does that connect to the back-end server logic? Now you don't have to be an architect yourself and you might not even know the names for all the systems, but you should have a high sense of how does data flow, what dependencies does your layer of work have on the other layers. So my area of the Eloqua product is mostly the UI layer, but we do have some server dependencies where we need certain endpoints, or we have certain dependencies on the API. So I need to be aware enough of what those limitations are so that I can give my team the appropriate stories to work on and so that I can appropriately prioritize my backlog. Third is knowing the software development process. So most organizations today operate in a very agile manner and they follow a typical Scrum process. Some organizations are still very waterfall, and then others are still kind of in a hybrid state between the two. Whatever the case may be, it's important that product managers know what the software development process looks like. What does quality assurance testing look like? At what point are you spiking new work? What sort of exploration needs to happen? How quickly can things be built? That's all very important to know so that you have realistic expectations and can manage the team appropriately with or without a dev manager. Another thing is you need to know the pros and the cons of different development frameworks and languages, and specifically the frameworks and languages primarily used by your organization or your product area. Some things are more common and some things are less modern and maybe more antiquated. You have to look at the pros and the cons for developing in different environments. Sometimes it's worth it to modernize and to go for that. Other times, it's not the appropriate timing to modernize or to move to a new framework. And within that, you need to have enough knowledge to say, okay, when is it time for me to upgrade my framework and my language, or are we good for now? As well as the other libraries that you're dependent on for the application. As a product manager, point number 5 is absolutely crucial. You need to have a sense of new technology that's coming out and how that can be applicable to your users and your product. Without knowing how to code these enhancements, you can think of, okay, React 16 is out now. What types of enhancements can I give to my users if we upgraded? Or, hey, Bootstrap 4, there's new accessibility features or new mobile rendering that I can take advantage of. So having that high level of understanding can be helpful so that you can prioritize that into your development mix and into the backlog. 6 is knowing trade-offs between when to settle for technical debt and when it's appropriate to do things the right way. And I'll tell you that 90% of the time, it's worth it to do it the right way from the get-go. But there are times where taking on technical debt, waiting for the automation, waiting for the instrumentation, waiting for those add-ons is appropriate based on the constraints you have and the resources that are available to you. 7th is knowing at a macro level the trends that are happening in technology within your industry and just in general. We think of things like voice, natural language processing technology, artificial intelligence, more intuitive interfaces, augmented or virtual reality. those things have implications for your product and are important to keep in mind, whether that will affect you today or next year. Those things are inherently changing how software products are developed, delivered, and experienced by our end users. So thinking of the role of product management and technical competency, things are getting more technical, and the role of product manager is becoming more and more of a technical role. So this is what we call the hype curve, and this is another concept released by Gartner, and they look at emerging technology that's coming. They estimate when it's going to hit mass usage within the market, and they think about when it's going to come to fruition, or when it's going to come to its maturity. So we have different delivery timelines here that are coming out to the market, and we have all the different technologies that are coming. So ones that you would readily recognize are blockchain, mixed reality, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, deep learning. This may or may not have implications to your product. And so as you're always learning and developing, modern product managers are aware of these trends, they're aware of these technologies, and they're able to some extent, talk about how this will affect the product that they are managing. So some technical resources to look at. There's tons of great stuff, and this depends on where you're at in your technical competency and expertise today. If you're already technical, you'll be drawn more towards the language framework communities, open source repos, that sort of thing. If you're less technical, there's lots of great simple resources available to you to learn about some of these technologies. You can talk to your Scrum teams. You can go to resources like Code Academy. HackerNoon is a great publication that talks about lots of emerging technologies, whether it be data science related, artificial intelligence, that sort of thing. And like other categories, I really find medium.com to be a great resource to leverage for technical understanding and expertise. Let me check the chat here to make sure there's no pressing questions. Okay, I think we're good still. We'll be answering questions at the end. So if you have things that you think of, be sure to drop those into the chat and we can address those. So the third skill for modern product managers is what I call relentless learning. Modern product managers don't just settle on what they know and what worked yesterday. They're constantly expanding their skill set and their knowledge base. And that's because the role of product management isn't static. Things are evolving and things are changing at an escalated pace, and product managers are expected to keep up with that. So a quote that I really like, this is by Leonardo da Vinci, arguably one of the most innovative people that has ever lived. He said, study the science of art, study the art of science, realize that everything connects with everything else. And that's very true for us as product managers, wherein we can draw inspiration and we're able to figure out what is the next phase for a product. It's not enough to know a niche domain of expertise anymore. You've got to kind of branch out. Advance the slides here. So thinking about lifelong learners, I talked at the beginning about how I read biographies. So I thought of 4 individuals whose biographies I've read recently who are good examples of lifelong learning. So Leonardo da Vinci is probably the most famous learner. Not only was he a master painter and artist, but he had broad interest in anatomy, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, things related to those topics. And he became very good in those areas. And he was largely self-taught. Abraham Lincoln, arguably one of the most famous US presidents, and he did amazing things. He was largely self-taught in the legal profession, politics, interfacing with people, psychology, and that allowed him to be so successful. And he would also learn things such as mathematical models, philosophy, and he was self-taught. Malcolm X, really famous human rights and civil rights leader, he went from being imprisoned because he's a drug dealer and a burglar, and he self-taught and reformed himself in prison. He copied an entire dictionary over, he expanded his vocabulary, he learned how to think, how to analyze, how to debate, and he would consume books very vigorously the rest of his life. And then there's obviously Steve Jobs, who had little formal learning, dropped out of college, and went on to found Apple. And he drew vast knowledge from art, typography, visual design, as well as technology and innovation, and what will help people change the way they are productive in life. And we got things like the iPhone, the iPad, the iTunes Store. Innovations came from Steve Jobs and his knowledge. So these are good examples for us as product managers and how and what level of intensity learning should be for us, especially if we want to be part of the best product managers that are out there and part of the most effective product managers. So to learn like these individuals and to apply that to our day-to-day jobs as product managers, there's a couple of frameworks that I want to expose to you and talk about that'll help facilitate that learning and make it as meaningful to you as possible. So the first of those frameworks, well, I guess before I get to that, so thinking about the two types of learning that occurs, there's the high-level learning that is shallow and spans across domains. That's the top of the T there. That's good at a couple of different levels because it's good to draw upon other areas so that we can effectively innovate. Now, the other type of learning is also important, and that's domain-specific learning where I go deep, and that's the stock here of the T. That's important because if we are truly domain experts for a specific product or a specific area, we need to be very deeply competent and versed in that area. Now, the kicker is for product managers, we don't have a choice to be one or the other. The modern product manager and the best product manager will have learning across both all domains as well as deeply within specific domains. You think of the Elon Musks of the world. They have a variety of interests and expertise levels, and that helps them innovate at a level that is unmatched or unparalleled within most industries. So the frameworks that'll help us employ the two types of learning where I think across domains and I think deeply within a domain are as follows. The first is what we call the FEYNMAN technique. And to give you some background, Richard Feynman is one of the most famous lecturers probably that's ever been. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize in physics. His work directly influenced the fields of nanotechnology, quantum computing, and particle physics. And he was famous for working on the Manhattan Project, which developed the first nuclear bomb. But what made him even more famous later in his life were his lectures. He was able to explain very complex concepts from particle physics to non-technical audiences, students who had no exposure to physics before. And he would use a combination of stories and simplifications without complex, burdensome language to explain very complicated concepts. And he would also use very simple drawings to communicate complex concepts. And that is what won him the Nobel Prize in physics, were his drawings describing interactions between physical particles, which before were only described using very complicated language. So part of his technique for mastering a topic, you would first choose a concept that you want to perfectly or almost perfectly understand. Then you would write down everything you knew about that concept, put it together in a way that makes sense, and try to explain it simply. And you'd want to be able to explain it so simply that you could explain it to a little child and they would be able to follow what you're saying. That's how simply you should be able to explain it. And when you think about it, that is actually really hard to do for something complicated like what we deliver in our products, or something complicated like particle physics. But that's part of the exercise, is explaining it simply. Now, as you try to explain it simply, the first 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times, you might have gaps. You might trip over certain things. You might not be able to explain certain things simply, or have other ways of explaining it without jargon or without complicated language. What happens when you stumble upon those gaps, you go back to the books, you go back to the drawing board, and you revisit and learn more about those. Because what that means is, that doesn't mean there's not language to describe that thing simply. What that means is you don't understand it well enough to describe it simply. So you go back and you need to relearn until you know it well enough to explain it simply. Then the fourth part is once you've reassembled it and you've been able to simplify it and explain the concept without complex language, without industry or business jargon, you simplify it even more, where you can have almost a concise statement describing it. And you would be able to also tie analogies or simple drawings or stories to illustrate that particular concept. So I think there's questions about some of these resources. Everything I'm referencing will be within the PDF that we're sharing afterwards. So what's cool about Richard Feynman is he became famous because of his lectures. Bill Gates liked Richard Feynman's lectures so much that he purchased the rights to them and published them online for free. So I've included that link as well in the presentation. But when you think about product management, this technique is useful to us on a couple of different levels. As product managers, we need to be able to explain very difficult, complex concepts to people simply. We should not be passing on the complexity of what we do to the end user or to our CEO or the CEO of our customers. So the Feynman technique is very helpful for that. It's also helpful because it's a great way for us to truly master different knowledge areas. Instead of regurgitating what our development team told us and not knowing what's going on, we can master a specific area or concept effectively using this technique. So the second mental model for learning that I want you to take away from today is a concept called deliberate practice. Now, there's a famous 10,000 hour rule that you've probably heard of, where if you practice something well for 10,000 hours, you become more or less an expert. The research that number came from, his name is Anders Ericsson, and he came up with this concept called deliberate practice, which was a way to get better at a certain discipline. Now, for product managers, we can practice deliberate practice to become better product managers ourselves. Can make sure there's no questions there. We'll get to your questions later. So the first part of deliberate practice is you choose a task or a concept or a skill that you would like to master. So for the purposes of this, we'll say cello because that's an easy thing to visualize. You then learn through detailed instruction. Ideally, you'd have someone who's expert in that area explaining it to you and teaching you the proper techniques. Or let's say you're developing something. So you get detailed instruction about how to deploy artificial intelligence models, machine learning, how to do X, Y, or Z. So you get the detailed instruction. After you get the detailed instruction and you practice it, let's say you come up with your first song or you ship your first feature, you need to get immediate and meaningful feedback for that thing so that you can correct what you did wrong or what can be improved. And then you keep practicing and practicing and practicing that same task or skill or very similar tasks or skills. And what you create there is this really tight loop to the point that you can self-recognize what can be improved, and then you improve it and practice it and keep improving and practicing forever and ever and ever. And to make that improvement more useful, you quantify that improvement and make it something measurable. So in the case of product management where you're developing or deploying something, you want to quantify improvements to the code or the customer reaction or to the benefit that end users get out of that thing that you're delivering. If I'm a celloist trying to get better at music, I would have specific improvements in terms of my technical skills, the speed at which I'm able to play, my creativity with certain sections, etc. The quality of my tone. You kind of get the idea. And then the process always repeats itself. You identify where you can improve or learn something more, and you repeat steps 1 through 5. So deliberate practice is useful for product managers because we need to be masters of specific skill sets or domains. And the best modern product managers are truly employing things like this, where it's methodical and constant improvement over time. So there's lots of great resources online to learn new things, whether or not that's technical or business related. Some of them are paid, some of them are not, so I've listed some of those here. Khan Academy is a great free resource. EDX, a lot of universities put free learnings online that are available to you. So an example is MIT has an entire computer science degree online for free. You won't get the degree credit, but they have their coursework where you can buy the same books, you can do the same coding projects as MIT students, is kind of an example. Okay, so the fourth skill of modern product managers is smart networking. It's not enough to build great products. You in your career as a product manager need to be able to connect yourself and what you're doing with future opportunities. Opportunity within your current role and your current company, and opportunity for later on in your career when you want to grow and you want to develop. So quote for this that I really like, the currency of real networking is not greed, but generosity. And this is by Keith Ferrazzi. He wrote the book Never Eat Alone, which is very well regarded, highly recommend it. But this is the essence of good networking. You always want to be generous. Make sure everyone's on mute. You always want to be generous in how you spend your time and how you interact with people, whether or not you're giving within the networking relationship or you're receiving in the networking relationship. And this is crucial to your success as a product manager, because good product development and management does not happen in isolation. You're dependent on a lot of people to be successful. Your dev manager, your developers, your UX, you're dependent on your support people, your marketers, your senior leadership who give you the funding at the end of the day. You're dependent on good relationships with customers, that sort of thing. So when we think about good networking, what should always be a part of that is what I call authentic engagement. So authentic engagement is being generous and authentic when you talk to people. And it's also being aware and appreciative of people's time and not asking for things that are inappropriate based on how close you are or how not close you are at the time. So here are a couple of examples of what I call authentic engagement that I've received from my network. So the first case, someone reached out to me and congratulated me on a new promotion at Adobe. And it was very sincere, very targeted. It was someone that I kind of knew, but I didn't know too well. That was great because they weren't asking me for anything. They were legitimately just reaching out because they cared and they wanted to wish me well. The second one is even a greater example of authentic engagement. Someone in my network reached out and said, hey, Wren, I have this new role. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm doing it. I'm excited. I liked that because I hadn't talked to them in a while. They cared enough to reach out to me and to share with me what they were doing. And that helped me reconnect with them and strengthen our relationship. So this sort of thing is authentic engagement. Let me give you an example of not authentic engagement. Unauthentic engagement is you reach out to someone and you say, hey, I see you're a product manager. Can you get me a product manager job next week? That is not authentic engagement, and that's not generous interactions. If you know someone well, then by all means, ask that question. But you want to be careful with how you approach networking because it can hurt you more than it can help you. Now, authentic engagement can happen both within your company and without your company. So think about networking both in terms of networking with your colleagues at your current company and networking outside your company with other industry professionals or with other product managers. Advance the slide here. So building upon authentic engagement, part of networking isn't just sitting down and doing lunch and getting an interview from talking to someone. Networking and engagement is about you finding your voice and being able to tell your story. What are you about and what do you bring to the table? It's important that this is known within your company because this will help you get the appropriate resourcing. This will help you get approved for really cool initiatives, and this will help you advance in your career. So a couple of pillars that make up build your own story. And sometimes you hear about this as being called brand building. I don't like to think of it as brand building. I like to think of it as you telling your story to those who know you and know of you. The things that people will think of when they think of your name or hear your name mentioned. So the first are your passions. What gets you excited and what really drives and motivates you? That should more or less be known or implied with those who you interact with and as you network. Your experience, you want people to know where you came from, what sort of things you've worked on, and what sort of things you have unique perspectives on. So, for example, I shared with you my experience at the beginning of the presentation and where I've worked and what I did. That gives you a sense of what my story is. You want to be able to share value. What is your time worth, and what value have you or are you able to bring? And this is important to know and for people to know, because that will help you get promotions in the future. And this will also help you build credibility with people within your network. If people don't know your value, they don't know what to do with you. It's hard to know if they should help you or not. Strengths. These are the things you're inherently good at that you can share with others in your network. That's an important part of the generosity and the mutual exchange of value as a product manager who's networking and trying to engage with people. Goals. You want your network and those who know you to know what your aspirations are and what you're doing to get there. If people don't know your goals, how can they help you get there? Or how can they think of you when there's a new opportunity or a new thing that they can help you with? Skills. Skills are important because that's explicitly what you bring to the table in a conversation and in an opportunity to work with you. And then lastly is accomplishments. You want people to know exactly those things that you've done in the past and what that did for an organization. And accomplishments should be very quantifiable. So with that foundation of what authentic engagement is and how to build your own story, let's talk about specific activities that will help you effectively network as a product manager. And if you don't know this already, networking is key to your career progression internally and externally to be successful. So if I have authentic engagement, and if I'm telling my story effectively, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. I want you to spend at least an hour on LinkedIn per week if you're serious about being a modern product manager and if you're serious about excelling. You have to be consistent about doing some of these things like being on LinkedIn and interfacing with others. Secondly, I want you to do an informational interview at least once a month. And that's minimum once a month. Optimally more, and we'll talk about that in a second. I want you to do a networking one-on-one lunch once a month. This can be with someone inside your company or someone outside your company, but get in a habit of always meeting or interacting with people and doing it for networking means so that they can better appreciate what your story is and what you're about. You should be able to attend 1 or 2 professional networking events each quarter. That could be product related or that can be just professional development related. Now for steps 1 through 4, for those of you who are in university now or who are actively looking for a new job, I want you to take all these numbers and double them or triple them. If you're getting a new job or if you're in university trying to place for a product manager role, you want to ramp up and do these things 3 times as often to be successful. The thing with smart networking is it doesn't work overnight. I can't just decide one day I'm going to network and then get connections and jobs 1 week later. These things take time, sometimes even years. And the reality is you want to nurture these relationships over time. So that goes into point number 5. Engage with your network regularly through authentic engagement. And keep it authentic so that it's not forced or awkward. And the modern product manager, as you think about your career progression and as you get into better products, better features, you often benefit from mentorship. So always be willing to be mentored and always be willing to mentor those who are earlier in their careers than you. It'll help you sharpen your skill set. It'll help you be more successful in the long run. So some networking resources. LinkedIn by far is the best resource for product managers today, bar none, no matter what country you're in. Second is your company network. Take advantage. Once you're at a company, it's so much easier to talk to people within the company. Even now, as I try to talk to people at Adobe, where I used to work, it's a lot harder to get them to respond. Whereas if I was still working there, they'd be a lot more responsive. So take advantage while you're within a certain company. Your university network, whether it was for a master's program or undergraduate program, take advantage of that. And then think about your industry and your product user groups and take advantage of those networks. Okay, so I'll stay on longer for questions, but we're at the 5th skill, which is business acumen. You need to know and speak the world of business to be successful as a product manager. Because again, product management doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can be delivering the best features, but if you don't have good business knowledge, it's going to fall flat and you're not going to be successful. So a book that's really good that I highly recommend is called The Personal MBA. And a quote from it: every time your customers purchase from you, they're deciding they value what you're offering more than they value anything else their money could buy at that moment. And that's the universal law that governs product. We want customers to get the value from our product and features enough so that they will sacrifice spending that money and that resource on other competitor products or alternatives. So the question I get a lot is, do I need an MBA to know business and to be a product manager? The answer is maybe, probably not. An MBA is very good if you're switching into product management and switching into business. Amazon, Microsoft, other big logo companies, they recruit MBAs to be product managers. So that's a very established path into product management. But that's not the only path to success in product management. That's not the only path to business knowledge. So keep that in mind. But MBAs it is a very good path. So think about the basics of business. What is the simplest explanation of what you should know? And so applying the Richard Feynman technique, this is what is in that book, The Personal MBA. So as a product manager and as a business, you need to create or provide something of value that other people want or need at a price they're willing to pay in a way that satisfies their needs and their expectations and provides value and provides business value and revenue to make it worthwhile for the operation to continue. If you could memorize and master this set of criteria, you know most of the basics of business and how to be successful. And you can connect what you're building with your product with what makes the business and supports the business. So things you should know as far as business knowledge. You should be aware of how a product is marketed, how it's sold, and how it's delivered to end users, especially your product and other products within your industry. You should know some of the basic principles of operating costs, profits, and losses. You should know the structure of an organization and how decisions are made. If you can't navigate how decisions are made, you're not going to have the resources to be successful, and you won't get the full projects as a product manager. You have to understand how your product fits into the overall big picture and how your product helps the success of the company. You should have a sense of what makes companies successful and what makes them not successful. And then you should know the principles of thinking and acting strategically. And some of this might seem obvious, but the reality is people make really dumb business decisions today that cost companies lots of money or causes really bad products to be released. So you should have a good grounding of business, and that'll separate you head and shoulders above other product managers who are maybe only focused on product and don't care about business elements at play. And here's some business resources. There's a lot of great online publications, and there's other education you can pursue, and books. Books are really good for business education. Okay, so there's a lot of material. So let's visit your questions and answer them. So I'm going to go from the top and go all the way down. Okay, so someone asked, I'm a good product manager, designer with knowledge about Agile. Do I need to increase my knowledge about development deeply? Or do I still need to know about the processes? That's a great question. So it depends on how your organization is structured. If there's a more technical arm that you work with, then I would say no. You don't need to know the in and outs of the development. As a designer, though, it's useful to have that knowledge. So the UX designer I work with, they actually started their career as a front-end developer. So they really speak the language of developers and are able to interface directly with the developers without product manager being involved. And that's helped them be successful in their career. So I think if you can know basic things like HTML, CSS, different coding languages available at a high level, I think that puts you in a good spot. Another question, do you think that I should have the knowledge about funding phases and finance? If you're working in startups, then yes. And if you're going to move into management, then yes, you should know how finances and funding work. But especially if you're in VC funded companies, understand how funding works, because that'll be useful as you pick companies, but it'll also be useful for you to deliver the right feature sets that help the company reach its goals. Should I play the role of product owner first, or no need to pass by it? It depends by what you mean by product owner. Sometimes product owners used interchangeably with product manager, and sometimes they're seen as more technical and less strategic. So if you're talking about more technical and less strategic, then that is a good path into product management, to be the product owner. If you're talking about product owner, product manager being the same thing, then yeah, it's absolutely worth going through the role and getting that experience, because it'll give you more exposure down the road. The Google design sprint and design thinking when you need to tackle an issue with users. Do I believe in the process? I'm not familiar out of the box with what Google does specifically. The link I provided was a general design resource repository that they share. I do believe in the Scrum process being connected with what they call design thinking. So you have kind of iterations with the mockup itself, and then you connect that mockup with the agile development process and do even more tweaks as you're developing and delivering the live functionality. How frequently are we using? It really depends on the feature. Sometimes UX design is very involved and there's a very formal process. Other times, as a product manager, I will just throw together some mockups, or we'll follow an existing design pattern, and that's all we'll use. That's all that's sufficient. Which method do we use to prioritize? Good question. So we use the agile method where we have a feature backlog, but we also have another method where, as an organization, we prioritize the big level initiatives that we undertake. So we have maybe a list of 20 in a ranked list, and we assign those big initiatives to the Scrum teams based on their expertise, based on their expertise and based on their knowledge level.
Yeah, are you hearing me? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I'm asking you, as I told you, I'm a product designer, and I have a good knowledge about front end. I also have a knowledge about the most of the technology, the latest technology, like the Microsoft technologies and front end technologies. But actually, good. I don't have the information or the deep information like about something like blockchain or something like that. So do you think that I need, if I need to have a product, okay, or to be a product manager for product, do you think that I need to ask about the technology that they are using first, okay, or I just need to play that role without having that deep in the technology, and I can depend on a technology arm like a technical manager or a technical lead or something like that? I asked you this question, but I need your preference about from your background. Actually, unfortunately, I don't know. I don't have the chance to know your background. Okay, so I would like to know about your background, about if you are coming from technical background, or you are preferring that the people from UX. So I know that a lot of people, so they recommending the people they come from a UX background. So what do you prefer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I come from a non-technical background and a non-design background. So I've had to learn a lot of those skill sets. Based on your question, I would say the second part, where you can go into the role, lean on a technical person, and then learn it yourself. Some companies, that won't be the case. Google expects product managers to have deep expertise in respective areas they manage, and they expect them to be a lot more technical. Everywhere else, though, what I've seen is the product manager will know about product management principles, and they'll know the domain, but not necessarily the tech stack. And the thing with technology is the tech stack will vary company to company, even for similar products and features. So having just the knowledge of product management and then being flexible to ramp and lean on technical people is, I think, a preferred way to go, because that is more flexible for your career.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good question. Any other questions? Informational interview, great question. Informational interview is, I reach out to you and I say, hey, I see you're a product manager at X company, or that you went to X university. I would love to talk to you sometime and hear your story, or hear how you got to where you are, or hear your advice. That's what we call an informational interview. That's more of a high-level get-to-know-you conversation, and it's not a very formal, I'm interviewing you for a job. So informational interviews are helpful because it's a lot easier to get an informational interview than to get a formal job interview. Even though you might want the formal job interview, it's often good to start with an informational interview because it softens the relationship and helps you have more authentic engagement. Do you have an MBA? I do not, but I'm actually about to start an online MBA. Do I see it as a must? No. If you're outside of the technology space now, the MBA is a really good path for a formal recruiting process into product management, because the best MBA programs get recruited directly by Amazon, Microsoft, Adobe, or if you want to start a mentorship relationship, I'm more than happy to interact with people. So I have LinkedIn here in the slides, and I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. My first name is spelled W-R-E-N, Wren. So it's pretty easy to find me. There's not too many Wrens out there that work at Oracle. I don't know if there's any, actually. So feel free to reach out as you have questions or are coming up on new opportunities. I love talking and networking with people. So I think they'll send the recording out, and we'll send out the PDF where I listed every single resource that I either directly or implicitly referenced. So appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Ren, for joining us today. And the insights shared by you were very useful, and I hope every one of us have got answer to all our queries. I don't think there are any more questions, so let's wind up the session. But before ending, I would like to give you a little brief about Pragmatic Leaders. So we started this organization with the objective of building a new generation product managers and training them for the jobs of future. So with this, we have built an immersive online product management bootcamp where, along with the knowledge, you will be allowed to build and ship a real product. And you can go and check out on our website. Also, we have some interesting sessions lined up for the upcoming days. You can also check them on our website. So that's all from my side. And as Ren told, if you have any queries, you can directly reach out to him. And Ren, thanks a lot once again for joining us.
Thanks a lot
Thanks
for
for
your
having me.
initiative.